Welcome back to my channel, everyone. As a friendly reminder, if you enjoy this video or find it helpful, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and click the notification button to always keep up to date with my content. With that said, let's get into the video. So today we'll be going over C++ functions and why we use them and why are they so important. So the reason these functions are so important is for reusability. So for example, let's say you have a huge project that you need to do. Let's say you're creating a huge source file that has thousands of lines of code. And to reduce this time, you can use pre-use code that has already been created to try to lessen the time or lessen your workload when doing that project. So those are what functions are used. You can create something. Let's say I can create a function that's 50 lines of code, right? Which is pretty big function. You can have smaller ones for sure, but you can have larger ones. But you can keep reusing these for other projects. So the best function to create is to create a function that can be always used again depending on the project. You can, for example, have a function and you can slightly modify it to your project. So that's something you can do. So let me just show you what a function is. So a function, it pretty much returns a type. Let's say type of variable. You want to return this. You want to return this. You want to feed something into it. So we have a type of variable that we want to return to our main function or to another function. Let's say we have a variable x and we want it to be squared or to be put through a quadratic equation or something like that. You can call a function. Let's say you have like the three variables a, b, and c, right? You can feed all those three variables into a function and it will spit out the number for the quadratic or the two numbers because you'll get plus and minus. Um, and that's what a function does. You can just put in the numbers after you've created its template and it'll spit out that number for you. So the way to create a function is to have the type of variable, function name, and parameters, which kind of looks like if we're for easy purposes, we can just have ints, int x, int y, or even double z if you want, but we'll just keep it simple, just say ints. And then we'll have our body of code. So something like this, and remember, so since this is a function and we have a type of variable, if it's not a void function, void pretty much means it's not returning a value. If it's not a void function, let's say if it's type of an integer function, then we want to return int of our int of our result. And but why I put these integers in parentheses is because when we return that value, we should just have it already declared in there already. You'll see in a sec. So let's create an example. So we want to have a type of variable. Let's say we want to return an integer variable. So we'll start with integer. Now I want the function name. Let's just call it anything we want. I'm just going to call it function1. And I'm going to feed its parameters. I can feed it parameters if I want to, or I can just create the values inside of this function. It's depending what I want as a programmer for my program. But let's just say I want to feed it two values, int x and int y. So you need to have the data types in there. Something like this will not work. I need to know, the compiler needs to know what type of data type we're feeding into it. And this is where we can write our body of code. Let's say we have an integer z, right? And we want to do x plus y. Now we need to use the return function for z. Remember, integer, this is an integer function, so we want to return an integer variable, which is z. If I do not have that return in there, it's going to print out a problem. It's going to say it's returning a non-void type. There's like it's not a non-void function. So that's very important. So let's create two functions. Let's say we have an integer in our program. Let's call it 9, right? Now let's create a function that squares that value. So just think about it for a second. How would we create a function that returns an integer squared? So if we're feeding an integer and we square that, it's still going to be an integer, right? So we want to return an integer. The function name, I'm going to call it squared. And I want to feed this number right here. So I'm going to write int, and I do not need to call it x. I can call it whatever I want because it's a local variable. So x will take the mode of this variable and do whatever I write in my code. It does not mess up this variable. So I can call it xy. Let's just call it xy. So what do I want to do here? I want to square this variable. I can easily write xy times xy, right? That squares of the value, correct? Or if I want to, if you want to practice using the power, we can include this directive here, cmath. What we can do is xy, POW. So we're raising it to some power. Xy is the value that we want to square, right? And what power am I going to do? We're squaring, so it's the power of 2. Right? And now xy, this value right here, is the power of 2 of xy. So POW, POW, xy is the same thing as xy squared. Now what I want to do, I want to return this value back to my main function. And now in my main function, I want to call the function. So how do I do that? I do not use the return type when I call it in the main function. Remember, this is returning an integer variable, so it's returning a number. And how do we store this number? We can store it in a integer variable that we declare. We can say it's y. Now we want to call the function squared because that's the name. And what parameter do I want to feed to it? I want to feed x right here. The x is a value of 9. So think about when I feed this in here, squared x. What's happening is this value, which is a value 9, is xy. And what are we doing to xy? We are doing xy squared. So that's 9 squared. And we're returning it. So that's 81. And we're returning 81. And that is being stored in y. And what do we want to do after that? We want to print it out. And let's see what happens. Let's clear that. 81. Now, what we could also do is we could delete this. We can create a void function to print. We'll call it print squared. And let's say we want to also, let's just call it x here. Remember, I can call it whatever I want because this is its own function and I have no local variable called x yet. So this is what I want to pass to it. So what I'm going to pass is this value over here. Don't think about this yet because I have not used it in the way I'm creating this function. So what am I going to do? I'm going to pass 9 into this function. So x equals 9, right? What my job is I want to call this function right here into this function here instead of calling it into the main function. So let's say int, or let's just say x equals squared. X, or I can comment this out. I can just cout squared x this is the value in void function. Oops, let's do this. What you guys need to remember is that this function for the squared is returning a type, so I can show it because this is a number, right? I'm returning an integer variable, so I can put it straight in the cout statement. What this function here is a void function. It's not returning anything. I'm not, as you can see, there's no return keyword in here. All I'm doing is printing something out. And now, for example, if I run it like this, there's nothing going to be called. There's nothing in my main function that's doing anything. I need to call it in my main function, right? So it's not returning a type, so I have no data type to store it in. So I'm just going to call it straight from it. Print squared. And I want to feed this value into it, which is x. Right? And that's it. Because once we call this, it's going to print out this. There you go. This value in void function squared x, which is our 81. For example, let's say I change this to 12. As you can see, that's all I'm changing. 144. So let's walk through it. So I put a value, which is 12. 12 is fed into print squared, right? Which is this function right here. So this right here will be easy to print out, this first half. Now, what we have is the function squared being called and feeding x. So the value 12 is being fed into here, which is being fed into here, which is also 12. So it's over here now. It took the form of xy. And what are we doing? We are raising it to the power of 2. 12 to the power of 2 is 144. And we're returning xy. And where are we returning it? We're returning it where the function is at, which is right here. So it's returning 144 in end line. And this is going into the main function. So as you can see, the main function never directly calls squared because it's being called in print squared. As you can see, you'll probably need a lot of practice for calling functions because it's not an easy concept, especially if you're just learning programming. Well, that's all for today, but we will be doing more function programs and practice because this is not going anywhere. This is just going to get harder. Alrighty, guys, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe.